Good day, my name is Sipho Mahlangu, and today I am joined by my lifelong friend and brother, Masilo Molebatsi. Masilo and I met when we were still young boys at school. We have traveled a long road together. Today, we are husbands, we are fathers, we are Christian leaders, we are professionals, we are members of the democratic South Africa. But before we became the men people know us to be today, we were two ordinary boys growing up in Soweto during some of the most difficult years in the South African history.
Thank you, Dr. Mahlangu, for that wonderful introduction. Kalibitso ke Masilo wa Molebatsi, as Dr. Mahlangu has annotated. I think it's worthwhile speaking about the genesis of this conversation, about what sparked this conversation. First of all, we took a decision, Yoguti, since this is the 50th anniversary of June 1976, it would be a worthwhile and a prudent exercise with Islale Pants and really have a conversation and reflect about June 76. Not only about the event itself, but about the consequences of the event, about how the event has actually impacted our lives. Remember, June 16 is not only an event that happened just one day. It is an event that impacted most of us who lived around that time forever. So it was just not an event. So it was an event that impacted all of us who lived through that time remarkably. As to celebrate 50 years of June 76, we thought it would be a worthwhile exercise that we have a conversation about our experiences of not only June 76, but about the times in which we lived in, which is the 80s and the 90s, and how has that impacted Impilo Zethu, and how our lives have come full circle from being, or from experiencing all the things that we experienced to becoming the people that we are today. So these are just two ordinary, not so young men anymore, who decide to sit down and have a frank conversation about these experiences. We by no any means purport to be politicians. We by no any means purport to be political gurus or struggle stalwarts or whatnot. We were not incarcerated at Robben Island and whatnot. But that does not minimize the experiences that apartheid had in billions around those times. So it is our hope, most of the people who lived around us that time actually have these conversations, reflect on what happened around those times and how it has impacted Impilo Zabo, their families, their lived experiences every day. How has this really impacted them?
This conversation today is called Not in the History Books, our lived memory of Soweto's struggle years. We have chosen this title because history is not carried only by famous political leaders, well-known activities, or names that appear in textbooks. History is also carried by ordinary people. It is carried by children who ran from danger without fully understanding why they were running. It is carried by mothers who waited anxiously for their children to return to their homes. It is carried by fathers who tried to protect their families in an unstable community. It is carried by young people who went to school in the morning without knowing whether the lessons would continue normally on that particular day or whether political unrest would interrupt the day. It is carried by families who listened to shouting, to gunfire, to police vehicle and disturbance during the night. It is carried by people who may never appear on a monument, but whose lives were permanently shaped by the apartheid and the struggle against apartheid itself. As we remember the Soweto uprising of 1976, we believe it is important to preserve our own memories and our own history during that period. We were very young when the events of 1976 took place. We were babies, literally. We were babies. We cannot claim to remember the details of the uprising itself. Our clearest memories came later, particularly in the 1980s and the early 1990s. However, we grew up under that shadow of 1976, the political consciousness, the school unrest, the anger of young people, the resistance against apartheid, and the atmosphere of fear that followed were part of the environment in which we grew up.
Let me start from the beginning. I grew up in Orlando East, Orlando East, Soweto. I grew up around the tumultuous 80s. I won't say the 70s, around the 70s I was around 5 and whatnot, but I think most of my life was lived around the 80s and the 90s. And around those times, it was the era Yamakabasa, it was the era of gangsterism, it was the era of, like I said, it was just a tumultuous period in Soweto. It was roughly around 10 years, 5 years after June 76. So you can imagine the remnants of 1976 and the traumas of 1976 were actually still alive and well in people's minds. And around the 80s, I think one of the things that was quite prominent was, if you remember correctly, there was the state of emergency around 85 and 86. And I think that's when most of us experienced the brutality of the apartheid regime, even at our very young ages. We experienced the brutality of apartheid around those ages. I remember I tell a story of when I was still a very young man. I was doing standard 4, which is now grade 6. And my first encounter that I ever had with a white policeman. I was still in higher primary around that time. I remember there was this young man we were going to school with, and I think due to the influences of his brother, who was actively involved in the struggle for liberation, he had written in his book Viva ANC innocently. He was just a young man who, I think, hearing his brother speak about the ANC, had written Viva ANC in his book. And for some reason, the police came and raided a primary school, which was unheard of at the time. They raided a primary school, opened up all our books, and they found Viva ANC in his book. And I remember that boy, very young man, and he was dragged out of the school in handcuffs. You can imagine, this is a 10, 11-year-old boy detained around that time. Remember, at that time, it was the time of the Internal Security Act, detention without trial, where thousands and thousands of young people were languishing in jail. So that's what I experienced. My first experience of seeing apartheid. I'd seen it from afar, but I really experienced it around that time. And as you can imagine, as a 11-year-old, 10-year-old, it shakes you to the core. And I was shaken to the core. And the situation became even worse, I think, because from there, obviously, you move from higher primary, and I went to high school. And I went to high school to go study at Immaculata High School. And I think at the time, my parents thought Immaculata would be a better alternative to all the schools that were in the township at the time, because it was a Catholic school, it was a private school, so it was considered relatively safe, compared to other schools around the area at that time.
There were days when young people left school to join demonstrations, to join community actions, and those were the times that we live in. At times, we participated without fully understanding the possible consequences of what was happening at that time. Young people wanted to belong. We wanted to belong. You did not want to be regarded as someone who was afraid. You did not want to be labeled as someone who did not support the struggle. There was tremendous pressure to identify with what was happening at that particular time. And initially, when I was at Dube Higher Primary School, the first experience that I had in my life as a young person was to see someone being banned and besibiza ngokuthi necklace, that person being necklace, that person being chopped into pieces, and it was a scary moment. I remember there was a guy in Soweto who was terrorizing everyone. His name was known as Umakushu. You remember Makush, those who were there at that time. This guy, students from high school in Orlando West, in Meadowlands, in Dube, they were looking for this guy so that they could discipline him. And you know, when I say discipline, if you were in those days, you would understand what I mean. And this guy, when they caught him, the police would catch him and he would disappear until the students got him. Bambamba. And when they got him, bamutrapa this guy. And then, sadly so, they killed him. They burnt him to death. And I recall I was at higher primary school at that time. Students from high schools, they were running around with pieces of his body after he died and he was chopped into pieces. And they were running around because there was a myth, and I call it a myth because I don't believe it was happening. There was a myth, Makushu, when you lock him in a room, he would disappear. So these people, they wanted that power, you know, and they were busy. I don't know whether they were eating and swallowing it or I'm sorry for this graphic thing, but that's what was happening at that time.
From 1988 up until 1992, and this is not a hyperbolic expression. In other words, I'm not exaggerating. I probably saw about 10 to 15 people get brutally hacked to death and murdered with my own eyes. And I tell a story to my children who refuse to listen to the stories of the 80s, that there were times when you would go to school. Immaculata was between two schools. There was Bubasnat and then there was Immaculata. So in between the schools, there was what we called a passage back in the day. So you can imagine, as a young 13-year-old child, you are going to school 8 o'clock in the morning, and you find Uguti there is a corpse lying in the passage. And it became almost a regular experience. You know, we would just jump over the body and go to school, without even batting an eyelid, if you will. And like I said, it became a daily, not a daily, I exaggerate. It became a regular occurrence to see somebody being hacked to death and burnt to death. It became our reality. It became our lived experience. And we often talked with Dr. Mahlangu to say, you know, we wonder whether this thing has really impacted us mentally. And because we are not seeing the impact of all those experiencing manifesting themselves in our lives, in the sense that we find ourselves killing people, or we find ourselves, we tend to assume that it did not really have a bearing in our lives. But I think on some level it really had a bearing on our lives, you know. And I think most importantly, one of the things that I always reflect upon is how it has desensitized us. It has desensitized us to an extent that even now, at the age of 50, if I see somebody being stabbed across the street, I would not bat an eyelid. But I think relative to somebody who was born in the 2000, if somebody was born in the 2000 saw somebody being stabbed, they would be traumatized for life, probably. But because this was my daily occurrence, my daily existence, it really desensitized us. And I think that's one of the ways, I think, that I can think of as I sit here, of those experiences, how have they affected our lives and.
Those were the years. And I'm talking there, we were very young. We're in the early 14, 15, around that age. Kalitoitoi, Kshaukwichi. I was unruly, Masilo Molebatsi will tell you, I was very unruly in high school, particularly in grade 6, grade 7. I was very unruly. Actually, they even said I was part of the gangster at that time. And I must be honest, as a young person, it was a time where one lacked discipline. Yeah. Very disruptive in my years. very politically minded. Ekhaya, I'm from a Christian family. Mawufika ekhaya, you are a Christian, uhleli kahle. Mawungekho ekhaya, you are listening to ingoma zomzabalazo, you are singing ingoma zomzabalazo, you are motivated. And I'm from Orlando West. You can imagine Orlando West, the base of Orlando West at that time, how much influence that we had. Orlando West nje yonke was very much influenced. And I remember at the time of the Mandela Football Club, we were growing around that time, nathi sibancane, similar age, actually, Ustompi, Ustompi, Sipeng. He was just a year older than us. Yeah, when they were all playing for that Mandela Football Club, nathi sikhalele ukjoin, and some of us were really protected by God's grace, But some of the young people joined that. It was just another time that we grew up in the mid 80s and in the 90s, Siphila in the streets of Soweto. We challenged authority. We disturbed some of the lessons. We were young boys searching for identity in a very unstable environment. And at that time, I did not connect my behavior to the violence and to the political instability surrounding us. Today, I realize that many young people were carrying anger. Many young people were carrying fear. They were carrying confusion. And some, what appeared to be ordinary teenage rebellion, what was happening with much larger atmosphere of social trauma and the anger that we had at that time. And this is what we lived in. The word impimpi carried a very enormous danger ngaleso sikhathi. Mangaziwa nje ukuthi if they could hear ukuthi you are labeled as impimpi, an informer, it could be a place that person's life is at risk. Sometimes accusations were based on no evidence. Sometimes there was evidence. And people lost their lives. They were killed. They were necklaced. It was a serious political, unstable years of our lives. Cabanga nje ubaba wakho abhala imoto I love Soweto because he was trying to show people, the street kids, not street kids, students at that time, ukuthi no, I'm from Soweto. That level of tension is where some of us, we grew up. The township violence and the political conflict was amongst us. One of the most painful parts of our memories in the township violence is of the 1990s. Yeah. I remember at that time, one was at high school. Apartheid was just was an unjust system, was dehumanizing system. However, we must also be honest that the struggle years were not simple. They were never simple. They were difficult. There was courage, there was sacrifice, but there was also confusion. There was political resistance, but there was also internal violence at that time. There was genuine activists who were genuinely fighting against the apartheid system, but there were also criminal elements who used political conditions for their own purpose. There were people who protected communities at that time. I remember in the 1990s, the violence that was involving supporters of the African National Congress and the Inkatha Freedom Party, the hostel dwellers and the township residents. That war intensified in many communities. Tinehlale Orlando West, on the other side, Bogui Ninesville Hostel, and above Ngasekhaya, Bogui Dube Hostel. You can imagine, Kali Bame Ninesville Hostel, the Dube Hostel dwellers at that particular time, most of them, they were from Inkatha Freedom Party, Bangenela Ama communities, they were walking down, coming to attack us. When you are resting at night, you would hear at the gate of your home, Stumpa, vuka ndoda, and you are not sleeping. I remember I was staying with my mom in those years, Ngihleli ekhaya, and you hear this shout, Stumpa vuka, bayahlasela. And your mom says, hayi ungavuki, and you keep on saying, mama bayazi ukuthi ngikhona, mangavuki kuyenzani. And I remember sivuka, we used to have dustbins, these steel dustbins, and you take a steel lead dustbin, awuna spam, awuna next, uphethe i-dustbin, isivalo se-dustbin sasekhaya, neyitina, nelitshe, not even bricks, stone, and you are going to try and protect that you may protect our communities. Young men would be called to wake up and go into the streets just to defend a community. Imagine being at the age of 15, 16 years old, being expected to respond as though you were a trained soldier. We were not trained. We did not even fully understand the strategies of political organizations at that time. We did not even understand some of the things that we could be doing ukuthi silwe nale system that was attacking us. But savuka kuliwa. Talk ukuthi amongst you there's only one person ophethe isibhamu nje. Tubula thina sifihlile lapha yana khale impempe. The whistles. It was terrible. It was terrible. They would be shouting, they would be running, they would be screaming. Unfortunately, others were shot in that process. Things were bad. The violence affected ordinary families. Parents feared for their sons. Women feared for their husbands. Children feared what they might find in the streets the following morning. That's how bad it was. The political transition towards democracy that brought hope to us today. But it was not easy. The process was difficult. Freedom did not arrive neatly. The road to 1994 democratic elections was accompanied by uncertainties, by suspicion, by loss of life, and lot of anger and lot of pain. During the day, it was not all violence we experienced was directly political. There was also social and criminal violence. During that time, there was a phenomenon of jack rollers who became a source of fear in parts of Soweto. Young people, particularly girls and women, faced serious threats. Certain individuals and groups terrorized communities. People knew their names. Families warned their children about particular streets, gatherings, and other groups and other people. When you walk in the street, there was fear. Fear being abducted, being assaulted, being robbed, being caught in gang-related conflict. Ladies, fear of being raped at that time. That's how bad it was at that time. Parents tried to protect us. They imposed strict rules in our homes. They wanted to know where we were, what we were doing, who are our friends. Some did not win. As a young boy, we still went out. From that protection, we still went out. When I look back today, I am grateful for the adults who blocked certain roads for us. We may have resented to them at that time, but their refusal may have also saved our lives today. During the struggle years, exile was part of the political imagination for many young people. We knew of people who had left the country. Some joined liberal movements. Some received political and military training. Some were banned, they were detained. These are people that we knew. Some returned, yes, years later. Others did not even return back home. And to young people, going to exile could appear courageous, was very heroic. We did not always understand the loneliness, the hardship, the danger that was involved in them. And around 1991, I came close to leaving South Africa. I had created an impression at home that I was going to visit my grandmother who was living in an informal settlement, who was staying there. And I left, it was a Friday. I told my mom I'm not coming back. It was a time before everyone had cell phones. I told my mom, I'm not coming back. I'm going to visit my grandmother. And I remember there was a call that we must go. And I accepted the call. I remember Rasta was convincing us. There was a guy in our neighborhood convincing us that we must go as young people. And I remember, I couldn't tell my parents. I couldn't say anything to them. I listened to the call. And we left. And it was closer to school holidays. And I went, and we went towards Botswana, at the cross border of Botswana. And I was very young. I think I was at the age of 1991, around 16, 17 years. When we went, we left with the understanding that you may not come back. And I think I left for about 10, 15 days. And when we traveled, we reached a place when we were about to cross the border. We were waiting for information on the other side, which was the border. And the plan did not go according. and the mission had to be abandoned because we did not get any support, any information. We kept on being told, "Good, there's danger on the other side. We cannot cross." Indawo lebe siyakuya ayikakabi ready. Until back at home, we received a message with, "Hey, mission abandoned. Angeke kube lula. Let's postpone the crossing to another date." And thank God we had to come back. When I come back, I told my mom I was with my grandmother, and my mom believed me because it was during school holidays. Even if I left for more than 10 days, it was okay. She couldn't even confirm with my grandmother because they didn't have telephones at that time to speak to each other. So it was, "Oh, you are back, it's fine." And later, that's when I realized it could have been the last time that I saw my parents, my mom in particular. Could have been the last time that I saw my siblings. Could have been gone. Life was not safe. Things could have been different. And only now I realize that I see the hand of grace, the hand of God upon my life that had made that journey kutinga phumelele. And I remember a few months later, some of my friends went. I remember there was another guy, Ufanyana from Etube, who went to exile. And he never came back. May his soul rest in peace. Good friend of mine. Thank God I finished high school, went to university in 1992, 93. Went to to university. We went to Durban Westville. Hey, Durban Westville at that time, it was highly political. It was a highly political institution. Bekupekwa khona ama-politicians. Student politics was active. SASCO and other political structures played an important role in shaping student consciousness. Some of us, because we left being the ANC, COSAS, and we then joined the SASCO at that time. The university was not only about attending lecturers and writing exams. It was also about debating the future of South Africa. It was about justice, transformation. The Minister of Electricity right now was a good friend. Was in the engineering department at that time. Yeah. Abo Malusi Kikaba, they were slightly our seniors, but they were the ones. Abo Masego, they used to call him Junior Councillor Enza Ilola. He was at L Block or K Block Lab, who ended up being a CEO, Yasa Telcom, I think, at that time. Those guys were brewed Westville. Abo Just Eyes, who are now the DJ, I think is in Radio 2000. Abu Pillay in 702 on Sunday. Those people, they are coming from that hub. We went to university with them. Some of the politicians, Abapuma at Durban Westville. So it was that hub. Masilo also became part of that brother student movement environment. Our university years helped us to connect what we had witnessed in Soweto with the larger national questions. It helped us. Molebatsi. It helped us. We began to understand more clearly the systems, the ideologies behind the events of our childhood. We started to understand things even much more clearly.
I think when we were watching the documentary Gawini Mandela, and which is one of the things that as well sparked this conversation, one of the things that we noticed was the fact that most of the people who were involved with the Mandela Football Club, who were involved with the struggle for liberation at the time, have been damaged for life, to an extent that some of them are extremely addicted to alcohol. They don't really have functional existences and whatnot. So I think in a way that has really, really, really damaged impilo zabo. And I think something has to be done. And this is one thing that we always converse about. Something has to be done for that forgotten group of people who were in the trenches, who fought day and night, who did not go to exile, who do not have even nanamhlanje glamorous lifestyles of being politicians or whatnot. There are people who have been left behind, and those people are, like I say, languishing in alcohol, broken families. Their lives are. I think we have been fortunate, maybe by the grace of God, that we find ourselves being relatively functional human beings who are able to function notwithstanding the challenges that we went through around those times. So I think it's a conversation that we need to have. How do we help those forgotten young men who were, remember, people who fought around those times, guys, and there was something that we forget. It was people who were around the ages of 19, around the ages of of 17, around the ages of 16, who were not properly equipped to deal with the traumatic experiences that they went through. So it's something, I think it's a worthwhile conversation that I think we need to have around those issues. One of the things that I think I want us to talk about. I think Dr. Mahlangu has told a lot of stories about 76 and whatnot. I don't want to be repetitive in terms of those experiences and whatnot. But I'm curious about the concept that I term the triumph of the human spirit. We are where we are today, especially the group of the 70s and the 80s. We are where we are today, and we have managed to survive all those traumatic experiences, and some of us have managed to become functional human beings because of the triumph of the human spirit. There is something remarkable about the human spirit. If we could go through the experiences that we went through around those times and still did not give up, still managed to go to universities with all those adversities that we were facing at the time, it is I think a pungent lesson that I think the generation of today should actually learn. To say, notwithstanding your circumstances, notwithstanding your situation, notwithstanding what you go through, the human spirit always triumphs. The human spirit always finds a way to triumph amid all the adversities, because the human spirit is we were built in the image of God, and that's something that is very, 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 very important. And I think those are the takeaway lessons that I think the generations of 1976 can teach abantwana banamhlanje. We are living in an era where young people give up way too quickly, and it's funny to me that they give up way too quickly with all the opportunities that they have at their disposal, and we find them who are giving. Tina, we had all the right to give up. People, we had all the right to give up because we were studying in inferior classes. We would study C7 in one textbook. You would go the whole year without even seeing a textbook. Going through our notes who were written on a chalkboard. We still had chalkboards at the time, and that was our daily reality. But in spite of all that, we managed to triumph. We managed to relatively survive those situations and become well-rounded individuals and well-rounded citizens. And I think that is an important takeaway lessons that we need to sort of teach to the generation yamanje, the ebizwa 2000. How does the human spirit triumph above all adversity? And something that is very, very important to me. I went through different challenges as well in my young life, and I think one of the most important things that I always tell my colleague here, Mahlangu, is the fact that I am blessed by the fact, Yoguti, in spite of all that I went through, encountering or having an encounter with God and being the person that I am today sort of saved my life. I don't think I'm different to those people who are now addicted to alcohol, who were part of the Mandela Football Club. I could have been one of them, by the way. Those experiences would have, and they almost did, by the way, would have shaped my life in a way that is so negative to an extent that I find myself being extremely addicted to alcohol and being addicted to drugs and whatnot. But by the grace of God, I find myself here, namhlanje. God saved, got to know Christ, and here I am today. I'm a functional human being. And one of the things that we are doing with Dr. Mahlangu is to try and use the church as a conduit for change, which is something that we are trying to do now in our lives, in our professional lives. We work through an organization called the Ecumenical Leadership Council of South Africa. Through it, we are trying to use the church as, a conduit for change in billions of abantu. We are trying to make sure that Isondo is not just a church, but it is a catalyst for social change. So we're using the church to change impilo zabantu because we realize that it is through grace that our spirits triumph. It is through grace place that we find ourselves in, the situations that we find ourselves in namhlanje.
Wazibani ngabe sikuphi manje Brian ngabe sikuphi God grace gave us a different direction in our lives. Gave us a different direction. There's a lot that we have experienced. That in 2026 we are celebrating 50th year of the 1976 uprising. As I said earlier, some of us were babies at that time, but that whole era until the 80s and the 90s, it is the shadow of what was happening in 1976. That's the environment that we grew up in. The youth of 1976 fought against an education system that was designed to limit their future by amabhunu. And the youth of today must fight for quality education, ethical leadership, economic opportunities, social justice, the restoration of communities. You must fight ignorance. You must fight corruption. You must fight the idea that success can be achieved without discipline. You must fight hopelessness. You must fight every influence that tells you your life has no value. You must fight everything. You must fight not to be destroyed. Right now, in South Africa, there's a tension of fighting illegal foreigners or immigrants. That's the tension of today. All those things are happening. But I want to encourage you today that it is not over. Today, have courage that you can also win. Victory is on its way. You will not be broken by whatever that is happening around you. I believe that you will win your own battles in today's time. I believe that doesn't matter ukuthi inhlangabezenani, you will win. And we felt in our hearts that as we commemorate the Soweto uprising and the young people of 1976 era, as we are celebrating or commemorating the 50th year of 1976 in this June, we honor those whose names are known, but we also honor those whose names are not known. We remember the children who grew up too quickly, like some of us. We remember the parents who tried to protect them. We remember the teachers who continued teaching in a very unstable conditions. We remember the young people who went into exile. We remember those who were banned, who were detained, who were imprisoned. We remember those who lost their lives. We remember those who suffered, those who survived by carried silent wounds in their lives. We remember the ordinary homes, the streets, the schools, the churches, and the communities that became part of South Africa's struggle today. This is not only about reopening the painful history, it is about honoring memory. It is about preserving testimony. It is about creating space for healing. It is about giving our children the truth or the truthful account of what shaped us, what shaped me. Some stories are recorded in official documents. Some stories are placed in museums. Some stories are taught in school, but other stories are carried quietly in the hearts of ordinary people, just like me and Masilo Molebatsi and many others. And those are the stories that are not always found in the history books. Today, Masilo and I have chosen to tell our story.
The takeaway, as I wrap up, of all these experiences that we went through is the fact that the cumulative effect of the experiences that we went through, it culminated in creating the individuals that we see today. We are those realities. We are the tear gas generation. We are the necklace generation. But in spite of all that, we managed to turn all that into something that is positive. And that's why I'm saying that is the testament to the triumph of the human spirit. Thank you very much.